Thank you so much. I just quickly want to take time to also acknowledge my co-author, and her name is Saujanya Dash, and we were colleagues working at the same institution, and also hold undergraduate degrees from the same institution. Our day-to-day work was with advising a lot of organizations like healthcare institutions, financial institutions, on AI systems, on data governance, on automation workflows, and all kinds of systems that are being deployed. And so, yeah, we've seen how these systems are built and are also regulated across Japan and India. And so quickly want to talk about the research gap that exists in the field currently, which is that the current in the current fields, there's a lot of literature on caste as a structural social system, and on AI based bias, and on the implementation of the GDPR, but there's no existing literature connecting all of these and also leading them down to participatory mechanisms. And that's the gap we're trying to fill today and to offer recommendations for it. So these are just a couple of cases of how caste bias is systematic. And so with our literature review, we reviewed a paper by a study which was conducted at the University of Pennsylvania, titled Caste 2025, which worked on a lot of large language models, which systematically generate a lot of more negative descriptors when prompted with oppressed caste identities. So these are different models which are providing different bias scores for one of the most popular models used today, which is the ChatGPT 4o, using PSAT methodology. And then looking at image generation systems, where when text to image was employed across a lot of different image generation models, Indianness was usually linked with certain different sorts of image generations, whereas when image generation was prompted with caste explicit identities, they skew more towards poverty linked visuals. And in terms of the third example, which is word embeddings, Hindi and Tamil, which are two of the most widely spoken languages in India, they would encode caste hierarchies at the vector space level, which means that this is the level where it's hard to catch any bias even before you fine-tune the application. So these are four parameters across which caste enters AI systems. There's bias training data because there's historical bias in the data. They reflect caste hierarchy, but caste is really unique in the sense that models optimize for predictive accuracy, and they don't ask whether these patterns are socially just. So if it improves prediction, the systems will continue to use them. And proxy variables, where pin codes are correlated with caste segregated neighborhoods, school names are correlated with social capital, and surnames reveal the lineage of persons, which can lead to repercussions as we'll see later. And feedback loops, where a model denies loans to community and the economic outcomes worsen, which then creates sort of a vicious cycle. And caste is unique in the sense that it's not an explicit classification. Companies are not allowed to collect that data. Institutions are not allowed to collect that data explicitly. So the way they show up in systems is very unique. So the hidden problem really is that parameters, which are seemingly neutral, like surnames, location, education, language, they reveal all kinds of identity and they're systematically reproducing caste hierarchies through proxy variables. And the algorithmic effect of these things is that the reliability status of someone with certain surnames or people belonging to certain geographic locations, individuals with certain vernacular expressions, non-anglicized documentation, and with certain occupational history, which is usually correlated with caste identities, will face lower predicted stability depending on the institution that they're applying to. And the way the feedback loop works is that due to the historical caste-based disadvantage, there are economic outcomes, and then the feedback loop gets reinforced and will lead to loan rejection, job denials, increased policing, monitoring in the long term. So talking a little bit about the constitutional framework that's existed so far within caste is that the Articles 14, 17 of the Indian Constitution have inherently created positions for equality, irrespective of different identities. And there have been landmark judgments like the state of Kerala and Thomas way back in 1976 that have rejected facial neutrality and affirmed that differential treatment for genuine equality must be provided. And it's very important that the jurisprudence needs to be outcome-oriented and not intent-oriented, which is a big gap that exists between today's privacy law in India versus what's been the past legislature when it comes to caste discrimination. And so doing a quick comparative analysis between the European Union data privacy law and India's DPDP, which is the Data Protection Act. And this is something which was notified just last year. And the constitutional framework even though it embraces substantive equality, that's not the case when it comes to DPDP. When for the legislation in Europe, we're looking at certain important proxy variables being categorized as special category data. And it is important that automatic decision-making is regulated. Human intervention when it comes to certain decisions in financial institutions or medical institutions is mandatory, and that is not the case with the DPDP. The DPDP at this moment does not have a specific provision for regulating automated decision making. So in order to make the DPDP substantively effective within the current framework that's there, it is important that the accountability mechanisms that exist are extended and interpreted in a manner where contextual transparency, effect-based regulation, and constitutional protection is prioritized. So the way this will come together is through mechanisms like within the provisions of the Data Protection Board, which exists within India's current DPDP structure, possible appointments of data protection officers, and prioritizing substantive equality and also dignity-based privacy, where the protection of such identities is not inferred directly from existing data. So these are a couple of illustrative examples, which I will go through very quickly. There's the digital credit exclusion, there's recruitment bias via applicant tracking systems, there's predictive policing flags, and welfare automation gaps, which have all been well studied and are potentially occurring at this moment. In the case of digital credit exclusion, we'll find that the currently existing mechanisms which exist for small loan providers, microfinancing institutions, do not provide for any check and balance mechanisms when it comes to this. And since they do not qualify as significant or may not qualify as significant data fiduciaries, they will not be required to appoint data protection officers, and this might lead to a lack of accountability at that level. Applicant tracking systems will use crowdsourced data and usually models which have been built on data which isn't native, so those issues can come up. Speak a little bit about predictive policing. At the moment, there's an AI system called Trinetra, which is being employed by the Uttar Pradesh Police Department, which is the largest state in India. And it uses a lot of data from it's a large database of the cases which have occurred in the past several decades. And upon testing, it's been found that there's inherent bias against Dalit and Adivasi groups, depending on their geographical location, and they're more prone to extensive policing and higher levels of surveillance than potentially necessary. The MGNREGA is India's largest employment scheme for individuals residing in rural areas, and there's a mechanism which exists within the participatory ambit of it, where they're able to conduct public hearings and verify the grievances of individuals who have faced discrimination in obtaining jobs, and these happen every 6 months. So here's a couple of recommendations for corrective action when it comes to bringing it down to the grassroots level. Through this paper, there's also an argument that it's potentially not very optimistic to negotiate with big tech or existing government mechanisms, because essentially it would all trickle down to community-led audits and participatory mechanisms. And legal framework which exists within the DPDP Act's general sense of general accountability obligation will be extremely important within the next 18 months, which is the timeline that has been allotted for organizations to comply with this legislature. And for the part about there's a model which can be recreated, which is done in the same way as MGNREGA's existing social accountability system, where Johnson Wise or public hearings can happen at certain intervals. And there's also the recommendation to create a digital platform where a mediation can occur within a specific timeline. And there is a time-bound review, and there's a clear escalation path to the Data Protection Board. And this creates a pathway to how the participatory audits can potentially work within the existing systems that exist within the ambit of other programs, and also possibly a new digital infrastructure which can cause mediation and resolution quite quickly. So the key takeaways from this presentation is that caste bias in AI is not accidental. It emerges predictably from caste-structured society. Legal frameworks need to shift from an intent-oriented approach to an effect-oriented approach. And governance needs to include affected communities as co-interpreters, as entities actively participating in the implementation of these reforms. Thank you.